The early dynastic period comes to an end with the rise to power of Sargon of Akkad. The Akkadian dynasty is founded by this individual. He takes the name Sharukin, which means in the Akkadian legitimate king. Let's first kind of break this down. Anytime you call yourself legitimate king, you are not the legitimate king. So Sargon usurps the city-state of Kish, and from there he consolidates his power and defeats the previously aforementioned Lugal-Zaghezi of Uruk, who had conquered all the city-states of Sumer in 2334 BCE. And with that, we see the northern part of Mesopotamia, that is Akkad, being combined with the southern part of the Mesopotamian alluvium for the first time. And Sargon is one of these kind of important figures because he reigns for 56 years. Now, he does a lot with his time. He's an incredibly productive ruler and expands through military conquest control beyond just the Mesopotamian alluvium. But I think this is something when we kind of think about history. There are an infinite amount of great rulers who only reign for 3 or 4 years, and their legacy isn't as strong as someone who manages to do kind of impressive things like Sargon of Akkad, but who also does it for a very long time. Most of our most famous rulers in history had extremely long reigns because, well, one, they're able to consolidate power for a long time, and that shows their effectiveness. But two, the longer you do something archaeologically, the more likely it is that we're going to have references to it. And that's what we can kind of see. I'm going to skip a lot of this on the slide because there's a video I want you to watch that's included in the slideshow here about the rise of Sargon of Akkad. But what we do know is he's able to take control of Kish, and then was able to consolidate power. And after conquering southern Mesopotamia, he then invades Syria and Canaan, and he spent most of his career consolidating and putting down rebellions through this. So he basically establishes an empire, and some people call it the first empire in the world, that controls trade and resources from the southern tip of the Persian Gulf in modern Oman, what was called Magan at the time, to the Mediterranean and into Anatolia, the copper and silver mines of Anatolia. So we can see the entire Fertile Crescent, and most of the modern Near East here is brought into the trading networks that were created by the Akkadian dynasty. Now, one of the most important things that he does, and the way he's able to consolidate rules, because he's also incredibly smart. He knows he can't rule by military might alone. He needs that kind of hegemonic control. And in order to do that, he places his daughter in Enheduanna as the high priestess of the temple of Nana in Ur, the moon god of Ur. So she becomes the high priestess here in Uruk. And she composes several poems that are dedicated to the goddess Inanna, and she's also believed to have written the biography of her father that's found in later Assyrian texts. And so in a lot of ways, she is the religious side of the argument here for the control of the Akkadian dynasty. So the empire is created through military might, but then controlled, at least in the southern Mesopotamian alluvium, by references to the traditional religious structures. And by placing his daughter in charge of that, he's able to quell rebellion and consolidate power. Now, Enheduanna is also important in her own right, because she is the world's first known author. Right? So we have texts written by her, and so she's the first identifiable author of literature in the history of the world. So Enheduanna is incredibly brilliant in her own right, and he applies that to consolidate power within the temple institutions in favor of her father. Now, if we kind of look at the way this came together, we can see the center of the empire here at Akkad. We know this was already a city-state because we have existing texts that date to this in the 21st century BCE, or 26th century BCE, before the rise of the Akkadian dynasty. So Sargon doesn't necessarily build this site as he's kind of accredited to, but he does bring it to its heights of power and establishes a kingdom here. So after conquering the southern Mesopotamian alluvium, He then turns his sights to Elam, and he's able to incorporate Susa and Awan from the Elamites into the Mesopotamian system. And then he wages war south into Dilmun in modern-day Bahrain, and then turns his sights on the empires to the north. We had three Mesopotamian city-states: the Upper Mesopotamian Nagar Kingdom, the Mari Kingdom on the Middle Euphrates, and the Ebla Kingdom here in the Orontes Valley. He's able to consolidate power here and expand control. He conquers Mari. His grandson Naram Sin conquers Nagar and incorporates it to the empire. And then Ebla is brought to heel as a vassal state, or at alternative times controlled under the empire. Now, we see a lot of territorial expansion through this, but there's also a lot of bureaucratic management. The Akkadian kind of influenced and forced a practice of linguistic assimilation, and so Akkadian, the language of Akkad, became the official language of institutional interaction all the way into the Assyrian dynasty. So when you read texts by people who don't speak Akkadian, they write in Akkadian for these official legal documents. It's almost like Latin in the European world. Akkadian becomes the lingua franca for all of these subsequent empires as a way to communicate in a common language, even though nobody is really speaking it in the sense of these cities. Now, Sargon's grandson, Naram Sin, the beloved of the moon god Sin, is an incredibly important figure as well. He is titled King of the Four Quarters, the North, South, East, and West empires that Sargon has consolidated, and he expands the empire. He conquers Ebla and the Armenians to the north, and he rebuilds a massive palace at the site of Tel Brak in the kingdom of Nagar in northern Mesopotamia in the Habor region. And it's from there that we can kind of see the restructuring of the economy to take advantage of the rain-fed agricultural systems in northern Mesopotamia. The economy itself is highly planned. After the Akkadian forces took Tel Brak and destroyed the city of Tel Elan nearby, they basically razed all the local farming villages and redistributed the population on the landscape in a way that they were able to better organize and control grain distribution and the bureaucratic activities. So we see how in these palaces like that at Naram Sin's palace in Tel Brak, these northern institutions, grain is cleaned, it's processed, it's turned into beer or bread, and those rations of grain and oil are distributed in standardized vessels that are made inside of these cities. So the northern Mesopotamian system here is then replaced by that kind of traditional redistributive economy of southern Mesopotamia. Taxes are paid in produce and labor on public walls, including city walls, irrigation canals, and we see extensive agricultural surpluses here made in what was called kind of the breadbasket of Mesopotamia for the rest of the empire. Now, both Sargon and Naram Sin also incorporated a large-scale shift in the way that leadership was viewed, and you can see this most tellingly on the cuneiform of the symbol for the name Naram Sin. So here you have Naram Sin in the cuneiform, but it's preceded by this star, and this star is the symbol of divinity. So for Sargon and Naram Sin, they have identified themselves as deities on earth. Kingship had always been blessed by the gods, but now kingship is among the gods. And so this is a massive transformation in the conceptualization of power. Naram Sin and Sargon view themselves as God. They were invested with immortality and divinity because of their power. We can see this most clearly on the victory stela of Naram Sin. I'm not going to go into this in any kind of extensive detail because there's a video I want you to watch for it. But we can see the representation of Naram Sin at the top of the battle, surrounded by his soldiers in formation below him, and the conflict of the Lulubi in the Zagros Mountains. They're in the mountains, and you can see them being slain and praying for forgiveness here behind the mountain. And Naram Sin has brought these people to bear, but most importantly, he is no longer wearing a headdress of a king. He is wearing the crowned headdress with the bull's horns that is traditionally associated with Mesopotamian deities. Now, After Naram Sin's death, his son Shar Kali Shari takes control, and the empire quickly falls apart.